Okay, well, welcome everybody to this JINSA webinar. I'm John Hanna. I'm the Randi and Charles Wax Senior Fellow at JINSA, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by the intellectual architect of a plan that's been proposed by a group of senior Israeli reserve officers and fighters to deal with the problems of Gaza, to try and defeat Hamas. And we have the intellectual architect of that plan with us today. It's been in the news a lot, and we're really looking forward to having it explained to us. Our guest is Major General retired Giora Eiland. General Eiland spent a career in the IDF, ending up as the IDF's the head of its operations directorate, the head of the planning directorate, and then after his retirement from active duty, became eventually the national security advisor to the late Prime Minister Ariel Sharon from 2004, 2006. He's been deeply engaged with so many important historical moments in Israel's national security history, including things like the withdrawals from Lebanon in 2000 and the ultimate withdrawal from Gaza back in 2005, as well as all the efforts to combat the effects of the Second Intifada. But General Eiland is with us today as the architect of what's come to be known as the General's Plan. It sets out a strategy, as I said, for the destruction of Hamas, starting in northern Gaza. It involves encircling of the territory, evacuation of all remaining civilians, whereupon a military siege will be imposed on the area, barring all kinds of humanitarian assistance, with the intent of forcing the surrender or starvation or killing of whatever remnants of Hamas remain in that territory. On the one hand, I've got to say, this plan has really been at the focus of so much discussion in Israel at the very highest political and military leaderships levels that any American think tank, I think, would be completely envious of the amount of serious attention this plan has gotten by their country's senior leadership. On the other hand, the report has also become the source of just an enormous amount of controversy within Israel, but especially, I think, internationally, with some suggesting that it's weaponizing starvation as a tool of Israel's war in Gaza, that it's going to turn northern Gaza into essentially a free fire zone for the IDF, and a concern that it will somehow supercharge Israel's isolation, dangerously expose it to further condemnation and sanction, including potentially with its most important relationship with the United States. And personally, I'm quite convinced that the letter that got leaked last week from Secretaries Austin and Blinken, after Israel had commenced its latest combat operations in northern Gaza, that at least a big part of what lied behind it is a suspicion and maybe even a conviction that without actually announcing it, the IDF may be executing parts of what they believe is contained in General Eiland's plan, and warning Israel that, you better dramatically increase humanitarian aid into Gaza over the next 30 days or risk potentially a further restriction of U.S. weapons supplies to Israel. Anyway, with the plan being at the center of so much attention, we thought we could provide a service to an American audience and to our JINSA audience in particular by having General Eiland on, providing him a forum where he can tell us directly what's in the plan, what is not in the plan, how has it been misunderstood or misinterpreted. And we really thank him for being willing to join us today. So, General, let me just begin by having you take a few minutes, sketch out the main elements of your proposal and what motivated your group to put it forward after the IDF's been at war now for, you know, by when you put it out for nearly a year, now it's more than a year. What's behind it all?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, John, for this introduction. And I'm really happy to be with you. A good chance to speak with, let's say, military people or people who have some better understanding of what is the nature of the wars of the 21st century. Unfortunately, many reporters, politicians, lawyers, and influencers and others have no idea what is it all about, and they present certain things in a very simplistic way, while the situation is by nature much more complex, as you probably know from your own experience. It is important to understand what is really happening in Gaza in this very, let's say, weeks, months, or whatever. Actually, there are two different, let's say, games that are played simultaneously. From the purely military point of view, we are winning. We are the winning side. We managed to kill about half of the combatants of Hamas, about 17,000, 18,000 people. We destroyed, we believe, something like 80 or 90% of the arsenal and the weapons and the production lines of weapons and whatever they have. We managed to destroy most of the really important or strategic tunnels in which they store most of their weapons. So from the purely military assessment, we actually won Hamas. So if Hamas was an ordinary army of some state, we could say that this army is not capable of fighting against us anymore. And a matter of fact, they cannot really create any real threat to Israel in this moment. They hardly have very, very few rockets that are remain. Most of them are for very, very short range. They probably cannot conduct any, let's say, assault against any Israeli location outside Gaza. And the chain of command has been dramatically interrupted. So we can actually, we face many events, but many events of very small teams that are trying to counter our units. Unfortunately, sometimes they're successful. Just yesterday, they managed to kill an armor brigade commander in Israel. He's a Druze guy. He's a real hero, one of the real finest officers that the Israel army has ever known. It is a real big shock in Israel. But other soldiers are killed only on a daily basis because it is very hard to avoid it when there are so many combatants, still thousands of people that are, of course, strongly assimilated within the population, and they are using the population as human shield. And if you want to take some positions where there are so many civilians, naturally you have to be careful. If you are careful, then of course many times you might be hurt by booby traps, explosives, snipers, and even remaining anti-tank weapons that they have, especially RPG. But as I said, from the purely military point of view, we are winning. But at the very same time, from the political point of view, Hamas is winning. And Hamas is winning because Hamas managed to maintain their political, civilian, economic control of Gaza, not only because there is no real alternative, but because they enjoy something which is very significant, and this is the supply that enters Gaza. Israel allows about 300 trucks of supply to enter Gaza every day. Actually, it is much more than sufficient for the real people of Gaza. It is supposed to feed about 2 million people who live in Gaza, and it is much more than that. And it is not only, let's say, basic food and water. It is much more than that. There are shampoos, perfumes, and many other products that enter Gaza. The food includes fresh fruits and things like this. And all this supply, as I said, is entering Gaza. And here is the problem. All this supply, or the vast majority of this supply, is actually taken by Hamas and delivered to the population by Hamas. So what Hamas is really doing, they check every truck, they take for themselves whatever they need and whatever they want, and the remaining, they resell it to the ordinary people in a very, very let's say, exaggerated prices. So it created a situation that on one hand, the people of Gaza, I would not say that they are happy, but most of them actually, at least they can survive because they get water, food, medicines, fuel, gas for cooking, all that they really need for basic life. At the same time, Hamas is perceived to be as the savior of the people because Hamas is delivering the food. So if they deliver the food, of course, they are perceived to be the real important power. Number three, because Hamas resell most of the products in NSA for a very high price, they make a fortune. And according to our assessment about Hamas, the profit of Hamas is about $500 million in the past 12 months, which is not bad, business. So they get all the supply for free and they sell it for nice prices, so they become richer and richer every day. Ironically, rather than being poorer and poorer every day, Hamas is becoming richer and richer every day. And the last point is because they have so much money, it enabled them not only to maintain the existing administration that includes tens of thousands of employees and the other people in the municipalities, in the ministries, and the other civilian services, but also they can easily hire new young people to be combatants and to replace those who have been killed by us. So from the civilian point of view, they can maintain the current situation, and there is no real pressure to end this war. And so we have to ask ourselves what exactly we can do in order to change the situation on the ground. And basically, there are two ways. The first is to agree on agreement in which the Israel hostages will be returning back, and it will lead to the end of the war, and I do not oppose it, because again, from the military point of view, we managed to achieve what we want. But of course, you need two for tango. You cannot end the war if we don't get back the poor Israeli hostages, that who knows how many of them are still alive. But if it is possible, at least my personal idea is that we should accept it, and we will be able later to make sure that Hamas is not getting, let's say, gets all its military capacity again. But if it is not achievable for whatever reason, then the question, what should we do? If we continue with the same kind of tactics, then yes, every day we will kill some more combatants, but they will recruit others. We will suffer, of course, not only from casualties, which is very painful to our society, but of course the cost of the war in Gaza is very high. And this is only one front that we have. We have other fronts, especially Lebanon. Maybe I'll say a few words about Lebanon later. So if we just continue with, let's say, these Israeli sporadic assaults and the raids operations and others, whenever we have the intelligence that some terrorists are in this building or in that neighborhood, on this compound, it might last for years. And this is not exactly consistent with the real interest of Israel, which is to end this war and to try to end some other wars and to reach, let's say, a better situation. So if there is no agreement, then I thought with some other friends that we should do something different from what we have done so far. And this is to try to actually to conquer the northern part of Gaza, but to do it in a way that is not going to be only, let's say, the right way from our point of view, but also can save the life of so many Palestinian civilians. Now, if you can imagine the shape of Gaza, about 11 months ago, in November last year, we actually managed to encircle the northern part of Gaza. I mean, there is one side of Gaza is the sea, two other sides are actually Israel, and we actually crossed the Gaza Strip from east to west. So we actually encircled the northern part of Gaza that includes or contains something like 35% of the total territory of Gaza. In the past, there were about 1.4 billion people there. Today, there are about 300,000, maybe 400,000 civilians who live there. And with them, there are about 5,000 Hamas combatants and some other thousands of other employees of Hamas that are taking care for the administration of Gaza. By the way, the city of Gaza, which is the center of Gaza, continues to be the kind of, let's say, the center of the administration of Gaza, from where the ministries of education, ministry for health, ministries of other things continue to operate. So the idea is simple. If we already encircled this area for the past 11 months, then what we should do is something very simple that should have 2 or maybe 3 phases. The first phase is to let all the people who live there know that they should leave this area and they should evacuate this area through 2 very well-designated safe corridors that we actually already established. And they have to walk not far distance. It is only a matter of maybe 3 or 4 miles to reach an area which is known as the Muasi area, which is not in a built-up area. There are a lot of, let's say, refugee. There are a lot of tents there, and they can join the other people who are there. And so it is something quite simple to do. And if some of them face certain difficulties, there are so many international organizations operate in Gaza, which have ambulances and trucks and all other, let's say, assets that they can help the people to live. And after the people leave, and again, we will give them a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever is necessary, after we give them such a chance to live, then all this area, by definition, is going to be a military zone because only the combatants of Hamas will stay there. And then we can tell those people who stay there, especially those combatants, that they have 2 choices, either to surrender, and if not, we will stop to enable a supply to enter this region. And when I speak about supply, I'm speaking about everything: food, fuel, water, whatever. By the way, the water is supplied by Israeli directly. The Israeli water system supplies this area as we do to the other areas in Gaza. So we will stop all these supplies and we will enforce a real, let's say, military siege over this area. And as I said, the results might be either a surrender or they will not be able to stay there. And if they cannot be there, either because they managed to flee with the people, with the civilians, which is fine, or they surrender, or if they stay, they will die in starvation, then we will be able to take this land without the need to fight in so many, let's say, very populated area against, let's say, a few thousands of combatants, but with so many other civilians there, with all the consequences of such an operation, we will be able to take this land. Now, why it is important to take this northern part of Gaza? First, this is something that might create a real pressure on whoever is the leadership of Hamas, because the leader, Sinwar, was killed 5 days ago, whoever is going to succeed him, because there will be a lot of pressure internally in Gaza. Number 2, whenever we speak about the, let's say, the Palestinian culture, by the way, it is the culture in the Middle East in general, there are 2 important things. This is the honor and the land. I mean, these are the 2 important values, not human lives, not other things. It is the honor of the leaders, especially, of course, the opposite of the honor, which is the humiliation, which is a terrible thing that they cannot take, and the loss of land. So we are going to tell them, okay, we actually take this northern part of Gaza. If you continue to fight and you refuse to end the war, then gradually this land will not be used with all the possible consequences. If we agree to any kind of deal, of course, we will withdraw from this area. But the control of this area creates a lot of pressure. Number 3, if we take this land, we will enable about half of the Israeli population that had to evacuate or to flee from all the villages and the towns and the kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip to return to their homes. Because today, the distance between these Palestinian neighborhoods in northern Gaza to the Israeli villages is still 1 mile or 2 miles. And certainly the Israeli civilians are afraid to return because it is so close to the remaining abilities of Hamas to fight back. And but if we create such a, let's say, such a buffer zone, it will enable, as I said, to half of the Israeli population to return to their home quite safely. which is important, and of course to resume a lot of normal, let's say, civilian activities. For instance, the main Israeli city in this area is Sderot, which is located only 3 miles or less from Gaza, and the train cannot arrive in Sderot because it is still under threat of potential anti-tank weapons from the northern part of Gaza. So if we take this land where we can resume a lot of, let's say, ordinary civilian activities and try to return to normality as much as we can. So because of all these reasons, it is important to take this area, and in every day we can continue and say, we are ready to end it. We are ready to stop the war. We are ready to, let's say, to reach any kind of agreement. But I have to understand that if you don't respond, then you are losing an important asset. This is more or less the plan. Now, this plan is fully consistent with the law of the armed conflict. It is fully consistent with the manual of the American DoD. If you want to be specific, clause 119.1, if I'm not wrong, I wrote it somewhere. Now I don't find it.
This is on sieges.
Yeah, but believe me, I read carefully the specific clause and parts in this manual of the DoD that is written explicitly that military siege is permissible. It is even sometimes recommended. And this is something that can be done even when you push the enemy to die in starvation, or at least you give them a chance to surrender, and you are able to do it as long as you enable the civilian population enough time and conditions to evacuate this area before you begin such a siege, and that's exactly what we do. I would say even more than that. According to this manual, which is, we are much more careful than this American manual, it is written there, listen to this, that you have to supply, to enable supply of civilians who are under certain control of your forces. But if you have good reasons to believe, Israel, have good reasons to believe that the supply that you send to this area is taken by the enemy, by the militants of the enemy, then you don't necessarily have to continue with this supply. But we are not going to this edge, I would say. We simply say that this siege will be commenced only after the evacuation of all the relevant civilian population. And if some people ask me, what happens if the majority of the civilians don't want to live for whatever reasons, then maybe we will not exercise this plan because this is one of the conditions. But then it means that we will have to, let's say, to conquer this area in more ordinary way that will, of course, cause much more, let's say, casualties to the civilians. And I'm not sure that this is the right way. Now, there is a third element, or possible element to this plan. If we manage to evacuate all this area from civilians, and we manage to either to kill all the remaining combatants, or they will surrender or whatever, then it will give Israel the opportunity to begin and introduce to this area some other possible alternative regime to Hamas. Because no matter who might be the alternative, whether they are the forces of the Palestinian authorities backed by Saudis, Egyptians, Emirates, Jordanians, whatever, today they cannot enter any place in Gaza. Whenever they will go, they will be killed by Hamas that control the area. They will not be able to take control of any area, even if some of the people would like them to do it. But if we evacuate a significant part of Gaza, then we will be able to enable those, let's say, other forces, this alternative, to take control of the northern part of Gaza. And then we gradually can enable the population to return and to begin to actually to implement a new regime in this area, which might bring, I would say, some relief to the misery of the Palestinian people in Gaza. So this might be, let's say, a third phase, which is much more political than military. Yeah. Now, the status, one last word, the status of this plan is that actually, I'm telling you, I presented this plan to the Israeli General Staff 11 months ago. in November, or maybe in December, 10 months ago. And I said, we already encircled the northern part of Gaza. Let's take advantage of this encirclement and move forward until we be able to enforce a complete siege. It was rejected at that time. And after I visited Gaza and I met with some of the field commanders, division commanders, brigade commanders, and others, and I understood that they liked this idea, I actually initiated it again. I came to the media, and it got, let's say, as John said, some very positive responses, some very angry responses. I must say that most of the people that are against it, they say, well, you want to starve all the civilian population in Gaza. And I'm trying to explain, no, I'm trying to do something exactly opposite. I'm trying to save their lives, because if we conduct ordinary military operation, many people will be killed. So I could not say any reason why it should create such an objection, as I said, in the American administration, as you said, and in some other places. That's it.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation, General. I think it's important that you had the time in order to lay it out as you see it, with all of the various objectives and caveats associated with it. Let me ask you, is it your understanding that what has been happening in northern Gaza since early October, with the evacuation orders, with the alleged ending of humanitarian aid starting around October 1st, according to this letter and other humanitarian aid reports, and then the beginning of this, what looks like serious operations around Jabalia in northern Gaza, is it your understanding that it's being implemented even without an announcement that the island plan has been adopted by the IDF? Are the suspicions about that correct?
No, I don't think, and I think that the IDF made some mistakes when they tried to do something which is, sometimes we say in Hebrew, it is neither coffee nor tea, something in between, which is, again, it is has only disadvantages. On one hand, they did call the people of Jabalia, which is a very big town in this area, and there are about 40,000 people now there, to leave. And it seemed to be very consistent with my plan. However, number one, they did not say, look, you have to leave because you should know that within a certain period of time, we will interrupt the supply. They just say, you have to leave. And some of them, some thousands left, but the majority decided to remain because they actually have no reason to leave. If this is only a request of the IDF, you should leave. The second thing that they began an immediate military operation in this area, which does not make any sense. It does create a lot of friction. This Israeli colonel that was killed yesterday was killed exactly in this area because there was a lot of friction, which is opposite to my recommendation. And number three, the IDF did not stop the supply to the whole area of northern Gaza, but only to the area of Jabalia. And the explanation that was given by the IDF is that this is a very hot military zone today, and we cannot enable supply to enter it because there is exchange of fire, which is very, let's say, very dense in these very days. But the IDF failed, number one, to explain what they do, to explain why they do whatever they do. And if they wanted to, let's say, to adapt my plan, they should have done it according to the plan, to be patient, to explain it, to try to enable all the population to live before you begin any military operation, and only then to do what should be done in the second phase. So it is something which is in between, not very successful.
Yeah, and my impression is that, just to follow on, and that is that there probably was very little effort to explain the plan to their counterparts in the U.S. military and DoD about exactly what, if they were beginning to implement elements of your plan, that there was almost zero coordination, and therefore the vacuum was filled by all of these suspicions and fears about what exactly was going on. Let me, before I get into some of the details of the plan, General, let me, as you say, you're a bit of a paradox for people, because my understanding is that for months now, as you said, you've been in support of a deal that would return the hostages and end this war with Hamas badly battered, but still standing and probably in control of Gaza, which would have made the Americans extremely happy and Israel's right wing extremely agitated and rejecting it. And now, fast forward, you're recommending a plan that talks about siege, about starvation of whoever remains in Gaza after your deadline passes. And the Americans and internationally, people are kind of up in arms and revolting. And the Israeli right wing has adopted your plan, has praised it, and sees it as the vehicle that they are now going to ride to depopulating at least northern Gaza and achieving their dream of reoccupation and resettlement of the north, which, as you suggest, is probably completely contrary to the political endgame that you envision in Gaza. So can you just try and reconcile and explain your own evolution, or how we hold all these things in common?
I can reconcile, and it is complex, but not much. It is not very complex, and I believe it can be easily explained. We have to understand the big picture. As today, Israel is fighting in 8 fronts: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Gaza, West Bank, and Jordan. There are terrorists who penetrate to Israel from Jordan. 8 fronts. And this is something that we have to create a very clear priorities. You cannot fight successfully. And even if we can, we are paying a high price. The economic price of this war is terrible. And there are a lot of other, let's say, prices and costs that we are paying. And I reached the conclusion that the least threatening enemy today, ironically, is Hamas. So we have to end the war with Hamas. And as I said, I'm ready to end the war tomorrow if they return all the hostages immediately. And this is good enough for me. I will say more than that. Some people say, yes, but if Hamas stays in power, then they will be able to rebuild their military abilities, and they will be able to do something similar what they did now in the next time. The answer is no, they will not be able to do it, not only because we destroyed the project that was built in the past 15 years, but because of other reasons. Gaza Strip is actually destroyed. Most of the buildings there are either completely destroyed or severely damaged, and all the infrastructure is destroyed. And actually, Gaza is in a terrible situation. It looks like, I would say, Germany or Berlin in the end of the Second World War. Now, everybody let's assume that we reach a deal and this is the end of the war tomorrow, and we get back the hostages, which is a very, very important matter for us for obvious reasons. It is part of the Israeli ethos that we do whatever we can to save our people. And Hamas, let's assume that Hamas, again, no matter who is the leadership, will formally stay in power. Then everybody in the world will try to offer a project of reconstructions of Gaza. And then Israel will say, okay, we will not allow any reconstructions of Gaza. We actually control all the exit and passages to Gaza. We will not enable to reconstruct and rebuild Gaza unless Gaza is fully demilitarized. So if the Americans, the Egyptians, the Emirates, the Saudis, whoever, want to issue or want to promote or to advance any project of reconstruction of Gaza in order to rebuild all the huge infrastructure and buildings that have been destroyed, and to try to build some kind of reasonable economy and agriculture and everything. Everything has been crushed and destroyed. We would say, based on our experience, yes, it should be part of a plan that will guarantee that Gaza is fully demilitarized. And I think that it is not only acceptable by most of our neighbors or allies, but it is something that we will be able to insist that it will happen. So I don't think that Hamas will be able to return to its original power. I would say more than that. The people of Gaza are not, let's say, they don't resist against Hamas because there is some kind of Israeli occupation of Gaza. But if there is the end of the war and we withdraw, and the people of Gaza will understand that Gaza cannot be rebuilt because of Hamas, I can believe that it will create an internal movement or an internal sentiment that say, okay, it is not only that you, Hamas, brought such a terrible catastrophe, but because you are the power here, we cannot return or try to return or to rebuild, let's say, our buildings and our businesses and whatever we had before. And I believe that it will create, I would say, the right movement that in the end of the day, Hamas will not be able to stay in power. But it should be done by the people of Gaza rather than by, let's say, the Israeli forces. So on one hand, I want to end this war, and I prefer to focus on other fronts, which are much more, let's say, challenging today. But if, again, we cannot reach a normal, let's say, political deal for whatever reason, then I want to bring to the end of the war in other areas, in other ways. And one of the other ways is to conquer the northern part of Gaza. I just prefer to do it in the right way and not in the wrong way. So there is a way to reconcile between two things, because the main goal, at least my main goal, is to end the war in Gaza. And here I agree with you, John, because there are enough politicians in Israel and enough groups in Israel that have a very, very different vision about the future of Gaza. And they want to resettle Gaza with Israelis or with Jews, which is terrible if we let it happen. And of course, all our credibility might be risked if the international community believes that that's what we really want. And that's why I think that the end of the war in Gaza is something that should be the strategic goal. How exactly to do it, either this way or that way. This is the common thing. Try to explain the, let's say, the contradiction between these two methods.
So, but just to put a fine point on it, under your plan, if things go, let's say, really well, your full intention is to allow the residents of northern Gaza to return to their homes and for some new alternative Palestinian administration to be built in the north that's not Hamas, that has the support of regional and international players, that's going to be prepared to live and coexist with the state of Israel. That's your ultimate political endgame in Gaza if things go well with your plan.
Yeah, exactly what you said. And I would say that my comprehensive plan, including the third phase, which is to enable some other forces to take control of northern Gaza, and then probably they will be able to expand their control over the other areas of Gaza. I believe it is supported by 70–80% of the Israeli people, not to mention that it is supported by, I would say, the military establishment. But of course, some of the more noisy political voices create a wrong impression and create, I would say, confusion about what is the real intent of this plan.
Yeah. Okay. One more point, just to let you clear it up, General, or reconcile it, is, for an American audience, even a well-informed audience that would have Googled you before the issuance of your plan, they would have found a lot of statements attributed to you immediately or shortly after the massacres of October 7th at the height of the turmoil and the trauma that Israel was experiencing that were quite sweeping in terms of talking about starvation of the population. It seemed on a broader level about attributing even old people to being the mothers and grandmothers of Hamas fighters. So somehow there's a collective punishment aspect to this that would have been merited or by if Israel had done that, even talking about the possibility of epidemics having utility and in ending the war sooner and helping save Israeli fighters. I wonder if you can, and because of those statements, my guess is there's a lot of people who now hear, well, maybe the island plan is being implemented, and they hear some of the echoes of those statements and they conflate everything together and say, well, the real intention of Eiland here is what he was talking about in October, November, and December about inflicting on Gaza in its entirety. So can you please just clear some of that up?
I'm happy that you're here. I agree and admit that I was not careful by some of the terminology that I used at that time, although I still think, especially now in retrospect, that if my ideas at that time were adopted by the Israeli government, we could end the war in a short time and save not only the life of so many Israelis, but also the life of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. And let me explain it in two levels. First, we have to understand, again, when a war begins, the very important matter, maybe the most important matter on the very first days, is to define exactly what is it all about? What is the narrative? Who is fighting against whom? How you call this phenomena that's suddenly erupting? And my explanation to what happened, by the way, I gave this explanation 15 years ago and along all the past 15 years ago, but especially, of course, after October 7th, that Gaza became to be de facto independent state. What happened in Gaza, it should be well understood. After Israel evacuated, we actually evacuated Gaza back in 2005. Now, it is not only that we evacuated all Gaza, but also the border between Gaza and Egypt was open. We evacuated this border also. So Gaza was not under any Israeli occupation, under any kind of definition, not only because we were not there, but because there was free movement between Gaza and Egypt. This is, by the way, one of the reasons why so much weapons and ammunition could enter Gaza easily, and we did not stop it. Anyway, the process that happened in Gaza short time after that is very similar to the process that happened in Nazi Germany back in the 30s of the previous century. So the party that won the election, there was election 2006, Hamas won the election, and in short time, they did exactly what the Nazi party did in Germany. They actually combined and synchronized all the activities of the parties with the institutions of the state. So whenever we speak about ministries, yes, the ministries are the ministries of the state of Gaza, just as they are, of course, led by people of Hamas. More important than that, Gaza became to be a de facto state because it enjoyed all four characteristics of a state: clear boundaries, an effective central government, independent foreign policy, and armed forces. This is a state. So the right way to explain what happened on October 7th is this one. On October 7th, the state of Gaza began a war against the state of Israel. And they did it, of course, in the most vicious way and in the most, let's say, unjustified way. Now try to think in, let's say, international terms. What happened, or what would happen if, let's say, the small country of Luxembourg did something similar to Belgium as Gaza did to us? So on one Saturday morning, the small country of Luxembourg began a terrible, vicious, cruel attack against Belgium, killed 1,200 people, most of them civilians, and kidnapped 250 people. Again, most of them are civilians. we could expect that Belgium would say the following: look, Luxembourg, you don't have any exit to the sea. Most of the supply that enter Luxembourg comes from Belgium, from the Belgium ports. So because of this terrible attack, and we are now in a state of war, of course, we, Belgium, interrupt all the supply to your country. And if we, Belgium, want to be very, very moderate and very soft, at least we would say, okay, we will enforce a significant or strict siege over Luxembourg, at least until you return all the 250 hostages that you kidnap in a very cruel way. And I guess if this was the scenario, 99% of the people in the West would support Belgium and not Luxembourg. So I said from the very, very beginning, look, what is the relevant advantage of the state of Israel over the state of Gaza? I understood from the very beginning, so the real Israeli advantage is not the military superiority. This is not the real advantage. The real advantage is the simple full Israel control of all the exits and entrances to Gaza. And Gaza does not have any natural resources. They don't have food, they don't have fuel, they don't even have water. And then we would say, and this is as a tool, not in order to achieve it, but in order to press them, to say, look, this is the situation. And if you want to continue to fight against us, and if you don't want to return these hostages, okay, you have to take the consequences, which are 2 million people that will not be able to survive. That's what I meant. And I believe that if we're consistent in this matter, we could be in a very, very different situation after a very short time. I would say more than that. This is a better example. The first hostages deal took place in November, and it was a good deal. At that time, we got 10 hostages alive hostages every day. We had to release only very, very few, relatively few Palestinian prisoners from the Israeli prison. We did not have to redeploy and did not have to do anything else beyond. Why Hamas at that time was so generous and ready to have such a great deal, hostages deal with Israel? Only one reason. Before that deal, there were only 2 trucks of supply that entered Gaza. And part of this deal was a Hamas demand that the number of trucks will increase dramatically from 2 to 200. And we agreed. And of course, it was a smart decision to agree because we could get about 80 Israeli live hostages. Actually, we rescued their life. Most of them would not have been alive today unless we have such a good deal at that time. But the mistake was that a day after Hamas violated that agreement, we should immediately say, okay, so we are returning to 2 trucks a day. I mean, if there is a deal, this is my commitment, this is your commitment. If you violate the agreement, there is no reason that I will continue and give you what you want as part of this deal. So you have to be much tougher in these circumstances, and to be tougher does not necessarily mean to be cruel. It is simply to be able to achieve what you want. And if we did it in the right way, as I said, the war could be over a long time ago. And remember, there are about 23,000 civilians dead in Gaza. Now, as long as you fight, let's say, according to the rules, that's fine, you can kill. But you can save the lives if we chose the right strategy. That's what I meant, that's what I explained. I agree that I had, let's say, very strong emotions at the time, and I should not say anything other than that. And actually, this proposal, just in one sentence, was, let's be humanitarian for humanitarian. You will release our hostages, this is humanitarian cause, and we will give you the food and the supply. It seemed to me very, very fair, and unfortunately, we were forced to leave it. And the results, as you could see, we are fighting for a year, and everybody is paying the price.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that explanation. I'm mindful of the time. We've only got a few minutes left, and I do want to get into elements of your plan. I thought something very interesting you suggested, which I'm not sure was part of your plan at the start, but it sounds like you've adjusted a bit by saying, listen, the Achilles heel of this thing is if those, the bulk of those 400,000 people remaining in northern Gaza who are allegedly civilians, not Hamas fighters, if they decide for whatever reason they're utterly exhausted, they believe the Israeli right wing's plan is that your plan is the platform for implementing some kind of new expulsion of Palestinians, or Hamas is just preventing them from going, that they're not going to leave. And when I talk to retired American lawyers from our military who are quite pro-Israel and have been staunch defenders of the operations of the IDF in Gaza, I've got to say they all, maybe because they haven't heard it directly from you explained, but they express a lot of reservations and concerns about the plan, and principally because they think it's not realistic, that in fact you will have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of civilians who refuse to go. And you will be left then, as you say, I think in the plan, or it's been said, that everybody that's left, by the time the deadline has expired, they're going to be considered presumptively as combatants. And they're going to either be starved or they're going to be subject to some kind of free fire zone where IDF personnel no longer have to regard whoever's walking around Gaza past the point of the deadline as fair game for being killed, that they've been relieved of the responsibility to discriminate between fighters and between non-fighters. And that will come at a price to Israel that, of course, with all the double standards that already exist, is going to be magnified 1,000,000 times by the international press. And it's going to be pictured, ultimately, those Hamas fighters, whoever remains and doesn't leave, they're going to get food from the south up to them through the tunnels. They're going to be the first ones that eat. It's going to be the civilians that are starving and subject to the free fire zone. How do you answer those questions? Because I thought I heard you say, if we assess that too many of them have stayed, this plan might have to be called off, because Israel's not going to be able, the IDF, given all of its professionalism and ethos and values, is not going to be able to subject several 100,000 civilians to what this plan suggests is the end game for them.
Two short answers. First, when we began the operation, the southern part, the very southern part of Gaza, the area of the city of Rafah, there were about 1 million people there. We asked them to leave, and we did not give any deadline, and we did not say that we would not supply this area anymore. And about 900,000 out of 1 million did leave. So in the end of the day, it is something that did happen. By the way, it also happened in the northern part of Gaza in the beginning of the operation. So I don't think that it is not realistic to believe that we can evacuate safely the 400,000 people who are there. Second thing, the fact that we say some deadline doesn't mean that they cannot continue and leave. The deadline is only for the last day that the supply will enter this area. But if people decide to stay, and let's say they have enough food for another 2 or 3 or 4 days, and after 2 or 3 or 4 days, they decide that they can leave, the safe corridors continues to be 24/7 open. So whenever they want to leave, they can leave. And we should be patient. This is one of the principles of siege. If you enforce a siege, you have to be patient and wait until you don't necessarily have to begin to be very aggressive on the very first day. So there are a lot of reasonable answers to some of these question marks. And again, I'm saying in a little, let's say, ironic way, if we decide to conquer the northern part of Gaza, which is a legitimate military objective during wars, one army conquer land from the other side, and we do it during when 4,000 civilians are there, the number of civilian casualties will be by far larger compared to what can be done if we exercise my plan. This is a simple professional answer. So we have to decide what is better. Now, if the IDF decides not to conquer northern part of Gaza at all, and not to take any other measures that I cannot think about them right now, and there is no deal, we will continue to be in the same situation for months and years. And many more people will die in Gaza, and the miserable conditions there will continue to, let's say, to create real threats to the populations. So you always have to compare between, let's say, bad alternatives. It is very easy many times to say whatever you presented in your plan is a bad thing. So what are the other course of actions? And this is something, again, I'm just repeating some of the conversations that I had in Israel with military people and the politicians, say, okay, this is my plan. You don't like it? I'm not, let's say, committed to my own plan. You have a better plan? I'm ready to hear. What is your plan?
Yeah. Can you just clarify the point, though, that I made in the crudest sense? One of the aspects attributed to your plan is that after the deadline, northern Gaza will, this closed military zone will essentially be a free fire zone where IDF soldiers are relieved of the responsibility to distinguish between fighters and people who are not fighters. I'm told that's inconsistent with the U.S.
No, I did not say it. It is not written anywhere. I mean, of course, we will have to decide what exactly should be the new rules of engagement. They do not necessarily have to move from the concept of today to something extremely aggressive on the other side. We are not the Russians and we are not the Syrians. And if we understand that there are too many civilians there, or in some areas within this area, there are still enough civilians, of course, we are not going to use free fire. And by the way, the fire itself is the least important matter. What is important is the siege, simply not to enable supply and to enable anyone who wants to live, including the combatants of Hamas. There is free access. We want to clear this area so it will be easier for us to, let's say, to siege it. And this is something that, again, I think it is very reasonable. There are good answers to most of the, let's say, concerns. But anyone who are in principle against it, of course, tries to exaggerate and to explain certain things that I never said, that they are not written and I did not mean to, in order to make it, let's say, as a terrible war crime, which is not.
Yeah. One more question before I let you go, General, and it goes back to your point, which I agree with, and I was actually the chairman of a task force that I think tried to identify the importance of who controls the humanitarian aid distribution as being a critical center of gravity of Hamas's continued political control of the population, as well as we thought it was an important strategic factor in terms of giving the IDF the kind of time and space it would need internationally to relieve the pressure for a ceasefire too early in the process if we had some kind of attention to humanitarian aid. And you clearly have said this is a pillar of Hamas's continued ability to control the population. And I hear increasing discussion in Israel, including by the Prime Minister at the United Nations, actually saying, yes, the humanitarian control and Hamas's domination of the process is critical to them, and Israel needs to take it away. We're in the process of developing a plan to do that. Do you propose that the IDF become, even apart from your plan, that the IDF take over, at least for some interim period, as much as possible of the international aid distribution away from Hamas's tentacles? And how much would that cost? How much danger would it expose the IDF to? What's your views on that?
I'm strongly against this idea, although this is what the Prime Minister thinks that might be good. I fully support the position of the Chief of Staff who oppose it firmly. And the reason is very simple. I mean, let's assume that we build some kind of, let's say, of a land port in which we keep all this supply and we let only, let's say, good people to arrive and to take all this supply. What happens when they come to the neighborhoods of Jabalia? in few minutes, Hamas will kill them or anyway will take this supply. So in order to secure that the supply in the end of the day are reaching the right families, we have to be there. Now, I want to be there, but after Hamas is over, not before that. So if we are trying, besides the ordinary military missions, to begin to deliver food and to make sure that it reaches the right people, we will risk our forces in a terrible way that is something that is crazy even to think about that. So I don't think that there is any way to do it. And by the way, when the war began, the American administration believed at that time that they would be able to use the humanitarian organizations, UNRWA and others, so all the supply will be delivered by these organizations. And it was a very naive approach because all those organizations are actually have been subcontractors of Hamas for 15 years, and they do only what Hamas tell them to do. So they cannot be independent whatsoever. So they gave up very, very easily, and Hamas is controlling the supply. So actually what is happening in Gaza is one of the paradox that we, Israel, are fighting against the state of Gaza, but every day we give the government of Gaza all the supply in order to give all the answers to the needs, not only of the populations, but of the combatants of the other side. This is probably the very first precedence in the history of wars.
Yes, I know in the past you've quoted famous statements by Churchill at the beginning of World War II about he has no doubt that there are good people in all the various countries being occupied by the Nazis, but he's not going to take responsibility for feeding his enemy and helping his enemies by sending all kinds of assistance and aid in to try and get it into those people that are under Nazi control.
Yeah, very accurate.
Times have changed. Unfortunately, Israel, there's a much different standard, of course, applied, and that's a whole different discussion. General, this has been a terrific discussion. I really was glad to give you at least some time to explain your plan and what it is and what it isn't, and what your objectives are. And I hope it's going to be useful to an American audience to make whatever judgments they're going to make, but at least to have heard from you, had a chance to hear from you directly about it, because it really is, at least at the moment, very much at the center of a lot of discussion. So I want to thank you for taking the time late in the evening in Israel at a difficult time for Israel. And anyway, I'm wishing you all the best and very thankful for you joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity you gave me. Thank you.